Good morning. Do be sure to pick up a Constitution before you leave. One of the reasons I think that we have some of the issues going on in our country that we have going on is people have never read the Constitution. So please get a copy before you leave. My talk this morning is entitled Making America United Again, Restoring Unity and Civility. As a boy growing up in Crawfordsville, Indiana, I attended Joseph F. Tuttle Junior High School and Crawfordsville Senior High School. I have a lot of fond memories from my school days. Now I'm 67 years old, and though I'm not an old man, youth has long since left me. And as I've gotten older, some of those school day memories have faded with time, but not all. There's one memory in particular that stands out. It's a little 11 by 14 poster displayed at the front of just about every classroom I ever had the privilege to sit in. And maybe now some of you might be asking yourself, seriously, of all the memories you've got from your school days, you remember a little 11 by 14 poster? And what in the world does any of this nostalgic walk down Dr. Rob's memory lane have to do with Constitution Day? Well, I'm glad you asked. As we celebrate the 234th birthday of the Constitution of the United States, let me explain the importance of that little 11 by 14 poster and its relevance to the Constitution. Whether I was in junior high or whether I was at the senior high school, posted on the chalkboard or on the front bulletin board of just about every classroom that I ever sat in was this little 11 by 14 poster. And the poster had these words on it. And think about these words. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Let me say it again. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Evelyn Beatrice Hall wrote these words in her book, The Friends of Voltaire, way back in 1903. Her brief 18-word statement was powerful, and even as a silly junior higher and a naive high schooler, I understood their importance. So why are they important, and what's their connection to the Constitution? Well, I'm going to answer that question with a question. Why are the first freedoms religion and speech? Well, first, the founders understood that one's religious beliefs would shape an individual's beliefs about morals, ethics, politics, and the like. Second, and consequently, the founders also understood that when people began talking about their religious beliefs, their politics, their ideas, that there was going to be disagreement. In fact, a precursor to free speech is disagreement. Because if we all agree, then there's no need for free speech. For our Constitution to work, we as a people to thrive, and for us to all enjoy the blessings of liberty, and for our nation to survive, we the people have a responsibility to respect, preserve, and protect the rights, the freedom of religion and speech of our fellow citizens. And this requires civility and unity. Neither of these words are among Miss Hall's 18-word statement, and you won't find them anywhere in the Constitution. But guess what? They are there nonetheless. I would argue that they are foundational, that they underpin the principles espoused in the Declaration of Independence and subsumed in the Constitution of the United States. Without civility and unity, we cannot survive as a people or a nation, and without civility and unity, our Constitution will not work. And if it does not work, our liberty will be lost. So what exactly is civility? Charles Kessler described it this way. He said, to be civil in ordinary usage means to be polite, respectful, decent. It is a quality implying in particular the restraint of anger directed toward others. In this sense, civility is not the same thing as warmth and indeed implies a certain coolness. Civility helps to cool the too hot passions of citizenship. When citizens are civil to one another, despite their political disagreements, they reveal that these disagreements are less important than their resolve to remain fellow citizens. The late Edward Shills, a University of Chicago sociologist, said, "Civility is the belief which affirms the possibility of the common good, a virtue expressed in action on behalf of the whole society." He continues, "Civility is the attitude that consensus about the maintenance of the order of society should exist alongside conflicts of interest and ideals that exist in a diverse liberal democracy." And as Kessler said, Shills reiterates, "Civility refers to self-restraint of passions with which interest and ideals are pursued." Civility does not demand that we agree, but that we listen and respect one another, that we place collegiality, friendship, relationships, humanity above ideology. I think the biblical command to love thy neighbor as thyself sums it up well. And what of unity? There can be no unity without civility. So how do we do it? How do we restore unity? Well, obviously the first step is to relearn the art and practice of being civil to one another. The second is to focus more on those things that unite us rather than the things that divide us. We celebrate diversity, and diversity is important. And when we examine the history of our nation, it is critical that we acknowledge the contributions of all those who helped to make the United States one of the greatest countries in the history of the world. But diversity, as important as it is, should never have preeminence over unity. We should always be Americans first, remembering and holding fast to the principles that bind us together as a people. As our founders understood, without tolerance of religious, political, ethnic, and cultural differences, indeed without civility, American society degenerates into a boiling vat of prejudice and animosity. The enemy of civility, and it follows unity, is ideology. Ideology is a set of ostensibly systemized beliefs referring to all aspects of life and asserted with dogmatic fervor and moral rigorism. President George Washington, in his farewell address, spoke of the necessity of national unity, saying, "The unity of government which constitutes you one people is also now dear to you. It is justly so, for it is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, the support of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize." He goes on to say, "Citizens by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. With slight shades of difference, you have the same religion, manners, habits, and political principles. You have in a common cause fought and triumphed together. The independence and liberty you possess are the work of joint councils and joint efforts of common dangers, sufferings, and successes." In his inaugural address, President Biden emphasized the need to focus on those things that unite us as a people, saying, "Without unity, there is no peace, no progress, no nation, only a state of chaos. Unity is the path forward." President Biden, talking about St. Augustine, and quoted him, and Augustine said, "A people is or was a multitude defined by common objects of their love." Common objects of their love. What are the common objects we love that define us as Americans? Opportunity, security, liberty, dignity, respect, honor, and yes, the truth. So all of that said, how do we do it? How do we restore civility and unity? Civility and unity do not require that we agree on all things, because we never will. Civility and unity require that all of us understand that though others may not see the world as we do, they are not the enemy. And finally, civility and unity require that despite differences of opinion, we have an obligation as fellow citizens to respect and protect the right of others to exercise their freedom of religion and speech. It's about listening. We need to stop politicizing everything. We need to stop dividing ourselves into our own little agenda-driven special interest groups. We need to stop assassinating the character of anyone who does not see the things we think the way they should. We need to refocus on the common good, the good that benefits all regardless of creed, race, religion, ethnicity, gender, and the like. We need to stop talking and start listening to one another. Thomas Jefferson, during his days of great political division, expressed it well, saying, "We must unite with one heart and one mind and restore to social intercourse that harmony and affection without which liberty and even life itself are but dreary things." It's about working together. As President Washington said in the excerpt that I read earlier from his farewell address, we have to work together for the common cause of making the United States of America a more perfect union. Quoting President Biden's inaugural address again, he said, "Let's begin to listen to one another again. Hear one another, see one another, show respect to one another. Politics does not have to be a raging fire, destroying everything in its path. Every disagreement doesn't have to be a cause for total war. We must end this uncivil war." So in closing, I return to Evelyn Beatrice Hall. "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Her statement is the essence of civility and unity. And more importantly, in 18 little words, she has explained what is necessary for our Constitution and the liberties it protects to endure. And finally, when you and I fully embrace Miss Hall's words, then and only then can we, the people of the United States of America, begin the work of making America united again. And you know, I was thinking how awesome it would be if all of us who are gathered here today would commit to beginning the work here at MCC. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear that? Is it on? Okay. Citizenship, civics, Constitution, country. How often do you hear those blended together? In fact, how often have you heard anything about citizenship? When is the last time you've heard anything about citizenship? The last time I heard anything about citizenship was on a Lone Ranger program, when the Lone Ranger was explaining to Tonto why they were fighting injustices in the world. So that's what citizens do. They fight injustices. So we the citizens, oh, let's see though, that doesn't sound quite right, does it? We the citizens. Well, what do we say? We say, we the people. Well, the people are also citizens. So we the citizens, in order to form a more perfect union, which is something that we need to work on, establish justice, we certainly need to work on that. Ensure domestic tranquility, there's a little work needs to be done on that function too. Promote the common defense, well, we do a pretty good job of that. Promote the general welfare, I don't think we do a very good job on that. As citizens, what are our duties as a citizen? As a citizen, we're supposed to do those things. You know, provide for the general welfare, create better unity. That's a citizen's responsibility. As a citizen, what do good citizens do? If a citizen sees a crime being committed, it's their duty to help. If they're asked for information about criminal behavior, they're supposed to help, provide information. That's what good citizens do. Good citizens work. They pay taxes. They do other things. They help their neighbors. Good citizenship. In the last 20 years, from 9/11 to January 6th, our country has been through an awful lot. And we are feeling the fallout from this 20-year period. But I never heard really very much emphasis upon citizenship. You hear an awful lot of partisanship here, partisanship there. But citizenship, I haven't heard so much. We've dropped the ball, I'm afraid. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been failing. We've not been doing our job. Because anytime a howling mob of vandals in this country attacks our national capital, something is amiss. Are those people not citizens? Is it right for a citizen to knock out the windows and the doors of our Capitol and kill a couple of police officers in the Capitol? What's right about that? There's nothing right about that. It's a bunch of vandals that have destroyed the idea of any kind of negotiations or talk or compromise or anything that citizenship involves. And everybody knows my feelings about the Capitol attack on January 6th. And I can't help but get involved in it a little bit here because it involves our country, our Constitution. Our Constitution doesn't provide for that kind of settlement of disagreement. You don't go up there and grab American flag and knock out the windows and spray bear spray on Capitol Police. You have respect. And my 5th grade teacher, Miss Bessie Farmer, by the way, taught me more about the Constitution and our country in a few short days, which she was talking about that, than anybody I know of. And I still remember, I can see her to this day talking about things like that. You just don't do stuff like that. That's not done in this country. And I hope they pay a price for it. They are going to. And I came up with a pretty good, I thought, punishment for those people that attacked our Capitol. They should have to find their 5th grade teacher, wherever that teacher may be, and write them a letter apologizing for attacking our Capitol. They should have to do that. And then if they can't find their 5th grade teacher, they also ought to have to take a course in U.S. history. Because I don't think they know much about history. Anybody that do something like that to our beautiful national capital, you know, a place that to me is sacred. It's the home of our country, home of our democracy. You shouldn't even walk on the grass around our capital. That's why they have sidewalks. So Miss Bessie Farmer had a solution for vandals like that. She would grab them by the ear and drag them down the hall and so forth. And she wasn't immune to grabbing several of her students from time to time by the ear. And you tread lightly around Miss Bessie Farmer. And we need more 5th grade teachers like Miss Bessie Farmer. We need more civics. We need more instruction about what's expected of citizens. Citizens behave well. They behave properly. They follow, if you will, the norms. I've been talking about norms in my class. Well, they follow the norms, and that isn't following the norms, by the way. And also, what have you done for your country lately? What have you done for your country? Have you expected your country to do things for you all the time? Have you served in military service? I know you're a little young for that, but then it'll come up. Did you serve your country? Do you do other things for your country? And I'm echoing here a quote that if you have not heard it, you should hear it. The older heads here, the gray hairs around here will know what I'm talking about. Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. That's a role of a citizen, and we are citizens, and we're proud of our country. I am. I'm very proud of my country. I get emotional when I think of the Capitol and what they did to it. I was in shock and everything. But enough of that, because, you know, the point there is clear. And we need to go on a little bit more about our Constitution. For example, our Constitution is an agreement among our citizens. It's referred to, some scholars, some philosophers refer to it as a social contract. Well, it is. It's a social contract. And in that contract, we have these provisions. Okay, people have the power to do this. People have the power to do that. People cannot do this. People cannot do that. The Constitution, as a document, both gives power and limits power. And that's why, as constitutional government, it's referred to as limited government, limited power. Okay? We have freedom of speech, but do we have absolute freedom of speech? No. You can't go around the country saying a lot of things. As Oliver Wendell Holmes said, you can't go into a crowded theater and yell fire. That would create a situation where people are liable to get hurt. So these freedoms we have, as wonderful as they are limited. They're limited freedoms. And insofar as having the right to life, liberty, and property, do we have the right to life, liberty, and property? Yes. But can those things be taken away? Can our government take them away? Yes, it can. And you say, oh, well, how would that make us different from some other government that might take people's lives? Well, there's a big difference. We have in our Constitution guarantees that they can't take your life away without due process. That means you have a trial. Were you guilty of the crime you're accused of? You have a trial. If found guilty, what's your punishment? It could be that you might spend years in jail, or it could be, according to the crime, according to the punishment, it might be life. So, yes, they can take your life away. They can take your property away. In case you have always thought perhaps that the government cannot take your property, well, you better rethink that, because it certainly can. If you look at all these interstate highways across the country, those interstate highways were built on people's farms, and the government took them away to build a highway. How can they do that? Well, again, due process of law. So there's power given and power limited. That's what a constitution does, both limits and grants power. And then one of the big issues about the Constitution and power and distribution of power is, how much power does the individual have? Just how powerful are we? And depends on, maybe you may think that, well, you can do just anything you want to. Well, no, not quite. We have laws, you know, in this country. And what do good citizens do? They obey the law. They don't violate the law, they obey the law. And as in regard to the power of an individual in relationship to the government, I might refer you to John Stuart Mill in his great work, Essays on Liberty. He was a libertarian. He believed in people having liberty, and liberty is wonderful until, as Miss Bessie Farmer put it, until you ran up against my nose In other words, your rights and your liberty extend so far as my nose is concerned. Once you do something to my nose, you've lost your liberty. You've stepped outside the bounds of your rights. In other words, as long as a person basically avoids harm, doing harm, that's the rule of thumb. If you do harm to someone, you're outside the bounds of your liberty. You don't have that right. You don't have a right to harm other people. You don't have a right to cause harm. You don't have a right to rampage our Capitol and knock the windows out. You don't have that right. You have outstepped your boundaries of your individual rights. And therefore, as long as you follow the rules and obey the laws and don't cause harm, you can do basically anything you want to, as long as you don't harm other people. And that's pretty much the rule about libertarian. Do anything you want to. You want to stick your head in a fiery furnace? Well, that's not a good example, because actually there'll be people who stop you from doing that. There's an argument, for example, does the government have the right to protect you from yourself? Well, our government assumes so. And why does our government assume so? For example, suicide. You know, they will stop people from committing suicide. You might say, well, if I want to kill myself, why don't I? Well, you don't have that right. Your life, in a sense, doesn't really totally belong to you, because what you do is going to cause harm to other people. And that is perhaps a good rule of thumb to follow whenever you're doing something, is to see or try to analyze, will this cause harm? Will this cause harm to somebody else, somebody else's property? And if you find that it does, you're probably stepping outside the bounds of your rights. And good citizens wouldn't do that. Okay, so you want to be a good citizen, or do you want to be a citizen that will do things that cause harm? Okay, so to me, that's the meaning of the Constitution, is that the Constitution is a very powerful document. It's a great document. It's been amended a few times, and it provides for protections of people under the law. The due process clause, it's just wonderful. But it also is a very powerful document. And when they start talking about the power of the president and the power of the Congress and the Supreme Court, it has worked out all these years. And we'll weather this storm, whatever storm we're in now. I hear so much about all these different storms, I'm not sure just what storm we're currently in, but I suppose it's the virus storm right now. And then I think of the function of government promoting the general welfare. What can you do as a citizen to promote the general welfare? Meaning, improve our society. I would recommend getting a vaccination, stopping the spread of this virus. Would that not promote the general welfare? Now, not that we need to harangue about that, but nevertheless, a person that goes out unprotected and maybe even catches a virus is much like a person driving a car drunk. They're a DUI, they're driving under the influence. They're going to cause harm. And a person that's liable to spread this virus is also going to cause harm. Harm against people that have done nothing. Harm against people that are too young to realize maybe what's going on. But we have lost a lot of people unnecessarily on account of this. And one of the big arguments about, say, having a national vaccination mandate or anything is it's big government acting against the individual. Yes, it is. Big government that is solving a big society problem. We've had a depression. Big government came to the rescue. We've had other problems. Big government has solved the problem. You cannot solve a big government problem with a county government or a state government. We have 50 state governments. 50 states that are going to decide if they're going to do this or do that. That's not going to solve a big nation problem. So I would put that also within the realm of citizenship, being a good citizen. So anyway, we do need more citizenship. We need more emphasis on it in our schools. And again, I hate to say, but I believe we have lost out. I think we've dropped the ball in emphasizing citizenship in our schools, and we need to increase that. I dare say there's probably not in many schools a single civics class even offered in our schools. We need it. We need it. We need to know. We need to understand. We need to study what our government is and what it does. And it is government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The government's not the enemy. The government is not trying to do things to people except make life better and promote the general welfare. That's all. And it is our government. It is government of we the people, or we the citizens, and it is what we make it. It's what we make it. So I think I'll end on that note, because what we do have and what we get is going to be the result of our activity or lack of activity. And by the way, another way to do harm is to do nothing. You can do harm by doing nothing when you're supposed to do something. Okay, thank you very much. And get a copy of that Constitution and start reading it. See where you're protected in that Constitution. You may need it someday. Seriously. You may someday give thanks on your knees for the fact that there is that due process clause. Due process clause. Don't ever forget that due process clause. Okay, I yield the floor.
As they were talking, I was looking around I'm talking about voting and the importance of voting. So I was looking around here at the top. There's several people here, just on this top part here on this porch. But when the Constitution was originally put together, they said what would happen with voting, but they didn't say who could vote. So states were left up to their own interpretation. So as I look around here, when the Constitution was written, only 8 people on this porch would have been eligible to vote. 8 people. There's a lot more than 8 people currently on this porch. And when you think about who were allowed to vote and who was not allowed to vote, the people who were allowed to vote were those people that were white males. So if you're a white male, you could vote. If you're a female, you did not have the right to vote. If you were of any color, you didn't have the right to vote regardless of gender. So we think about today, why is it important for me to vote? Well, it's important for me to vote because my ancestors wouldn't have had the right to vote. In fact, 100 years ago, I don't know if I would have been invited to come and talk to you today. Or 200 years ago. Because the Constitution did not say who could have the right to vote, the question is left up to individual states. And the states said, you know what, if you did not own property, or if you did not, could not pass a literacy test, which was very difficult, then you were not going to be able to vote. And it wasn't until the 15th Amendment in 1869 that even allowed African American males to vote. But even at that, it still had restrictions. And it was the 24th Amendment in 64 that eliminated the poll tax. You used to have to pay a tax to go vote until 1964. They eliminated that, and in the 1965, it ended Jim Crow laws, things that prevented the right to vote. Women were not allowed to vote until 1920, when the long efforts of women's suffrage movement was approved by the 19th Amendment. With these amendments, removing the previous barriers to voting, being sex and race, all Americans over the age of 21 were able to vote by the 1960s. And then it was like, hey, how come I can go serve my country in Vietnam, but I can't vote? So then finally, in 1971, the American voting age was lowered until 18 years old, building on the idea that if you had the right to fight for your country, you had the right to vote for your country. So think about that. If we have 18-year-olds that have gone and died for our country, should we not, as an 18-year-old, take it upon ourselves to vote for our country? It is estimated, according to a study in Portland, Oregon, that only 15% of people vote at local mayoral and elections. Think about that. 15% of the citizens are determining what happens in your local government. Do you not want a voice to say, hey, I want to speak up, I want to vote, I want to say who is elected into mayoral and senator and elections? If you ever think about your one vote, so I ask people, I say, how come you don't vote? Well, my one vote in a sea of millions of votes doesn't really matter anyway. Consider that the closest elections in history, and I will tell you that even here in Hopkins County, that the primary, the Republican primary that determined the difference between David Jackson being reelected in the primary and Mayor Cotton being elected at the primary was 21 votes. 21 citizens in Madisonville, Kentucky determined whether or not the difference between the two mayoral elections. Your vote may not directly elect a president. In fact, it goes into the Electoral College. Most states have a winner-take-all system where the Electoral College, so all the people in that state that vote for one presidential election will go toward that. But however, in local and state elections, while presidents and the national elections usually are at a significant turnout, so that presidential election is only once every 4 years. But those small elections are every single year. I want to tell you, I know some of you may not even be 18, but if you're 17 years old currently, if you're 17 and it is an election year, you can still register to vote and vote in that year's election, even if you're going to be 18 before November or not. If you're going to be 18 during that year, you can still register to vote. And that has been confirmed. I have confirmed that. There are also local, state, and elections to consider. And low turnout means that when you don't show up to vote, you're saying, you know what, it's really not important to me. It really has no impact on me, has nothing to do with me. So I encourage you today to go vote. And how do you register to vote? Just go to the website, votekentucky.us, and you can register to vote online. It's simple. Or you can fill out a registration card at the county clerk's office. So I want to encourage you today to say, you know what, people have gone before me, and regardless of how you vote, I want to encourage you to take your right to vote, because no one can take that vote away from you.